Based in the UK, Team 17 have had a long and winding career in the gaming industry. They've published many multi-platform releases, but are generally best known for the Worms franchise. This tongue-in-cheek artillery IP entered the scene in 1995, featuring homicidal invertebrates with a penchant for trash-talking their foes. From a 2D perspective, they utilised zany, off-kilter weapons to blast the enemy team to pieces. Its unique aesthetic and wacky action drew a large following on the PC, but when it came to progressing the series forward, things got complicated. Like Sonic the Hedgehog and Castlevania before it, Worms faced mixed reactions when it broke into the third dimension. Development began in 2002, with publishing handled by SEGA in European territories. The trio of releases in the early 2000s included the base concept Worms 3D, the attack-defend focused Worms Forts Under Siege, and finally Worms 4 Mayhem. All of them faced criticism for their camera and controls. On the whole, it seemed like the simple and accessible 2D formula had been ditched for something more imprecise. Equally controversial was the look of the Worms themselves. Their exaggerated facial features stood out far more than the simple cartoon sprites from previous games. All these critiques went right over my 11-year-old head as I was introduced to Worms 4 for the PlayStation 2, a game I enjoyed a lot back in 2005. After playing it with friends, I bought my own copy and got stuck in. It would be the last title to feature the 3D perspective, and it's arguably the best of the 3 games. Series veterans are sure to cry foul, but let me tell you why the 4th Worms title remains enjoyable years later. For starters, the game's colourful graphics and environments are well suited to the series. Instead of going for an edgy reboot like Bomberman Act Zero, Worms 4 stays true to its roots. The title also boasts a simple yet effective soundtrack that complements your antics on every turn. It's the first release with a full story mode, which takes your team of worms and places them in different settings and scenarios. Across building sites, Arabian vistas, and even prehistoric times, the variety is strong, with each broken up by brief rendered cutscenes. The witty sense of humour is on point throughout the game, something enhanced by the endless gibberish of the characters. For the most part, the single-player levels do a good job of leveraging the mechanics. In the medieval chapter, for example, the enemy team uses wind machines that can throw your projectiles off balance. When you strip everything else away, the game's core remains the same. Your objective is to wipe out the enemy team, or in other cases collect key items around the levels. Strategy depends on the weapons available, the turn timer, and your overall positioning. Placing your worm in the right part of the map for a bazooka or homing missile strike may rain heavy damage on your foes, but you may also put yourself at risk of being knocked off your perch or into the water. Worms 4 expands the sandbox with deadly new weapons like the sentry gun joining the fan favourites. Some of my personal picks include the incredibly destructive concrete donkey and the player-controlled super sheep. Of course, many of the items continue the same raunchy humour the series built its name on. Destructible environments form the other half of the package, and part of the fun involves ripping apart the landscape, your worms venturing closer and closer to a watery grave. Where Worms 4 really made an impression was the customization. Before you get into the game itself, you'll be crafting your own teams, game styles, and in another first for the series, weapons. This is broken down into 3 categories: launch, throw, and airstrike. You can crank damage levels, blast radius, and unique features like cluster bombs, to name a few. Simultaneously, you're governed by a gauge that prevents you from maxing out every stat and breaking the game's balance. While your creations are integrated heavily within the game mechanics, it's surprising that this feature never returned in subsequent releases, at least not to the same standards. Tying the feature set together is the shop and trophy cabinet, which both generate plenty of replayability. Across all modes, earning coins allows you to purchase new modes and custom items. On top of that, reaching certain milestones will unlock trophies for even more currency. There's a surprisingly large amount of content here, one that kept me busy back in 2006. Even the standalone challenges utilise the tools in unique ways, such as using the Icarus wings to platform your way around the environment. That brings us to the final piece of the package, multiplayer. 4 teams per match, 6 worms apiece, a across a wide variety of maps and modes. Some of the wackiest moments unfolded on the oil rig stage, with its destructible floors. Territory control makes a return, but it's the destruction mode that made the bigger impact for me. Back in the days of local multiplayer, many heated arguments were had here. Having your opponents in the same room mixed in with the turn-based tactics generated a fair bit of tension. Attacking one base over another, focusing all your fire on a single team, these moments created some serious rivalries, the kind of thing that's missing in online components. Before jumping into online play with the PS3 a year later, Worms 4 was also one of the last releases for getting some mates together and wrecking each other offline. That kind of local competition is rarer than ever in today's gaming landscape. With all that said, I can see where some of the detractors are coming from. Being based in a 3D environment, the floaty physics can be a problem at times. Because the worms slide around the environments, it can be tricky to tell whether your next jump will reach its full height or cause a premature death. This can be frustrating in the story missions, as there are no checkpoints to be found. Trying to make a jump only to plunge to the ground or water can throw a wrench in the works of your carefully planned strategy. Other designs are simply too short and basic. For example, the crate escape is as simple as making your way to the top of the building, then parachuting down in a single turn. These elements don't utilise the sandbox very effectively and feel like throwaways when compared to other sections. Future story modes would keep things fairly straightforward in their 2D perspective. Team 17 continues the Worms franchise to this day, albeit to far less fanfare than it had over a decade ago. While Worms 4 was re-released in 2011 on 7th generation hardware, the community didn't take much notice of it. The third dimension has long been abandoned in pursuit of classic 2D side-scrolling. While many long-term fans were happy to see the series go back to its roots, the 3D titles aren't a complete write-off. Whether it was having friends over for a round of deathmatch or trying to beat the best time in the story missions, Worms 4 delivered a fun factor that still persists over 15 years later. Thanks for watching. Despite critical reaction at the time, I still recommend the fourth Worms title today. Did any of you get into the series? Do you prefer the old school 2D style or the experimental 3D foray? Stick your thoughts in the comments, and as always, the links to my blog and channel are in the description.